Okay, the tears of Yirmiyahu. How could you not cry together with him? We're coming up to Tisha B'Av. With the Eibish's help, Mashiach will come and it will be a big Yom Tov. It will be a big, great Yom Tov. Tisha B'Av is the destruction of both the first and the second Beis Hamikdash. In Tanakh, we have much record about the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, in the Sfarim of Yirmiyahu, in Malachim, which Yirmiyahu wrote, and in Divrei Hayomim, written by Ezra. We have quite the record about the Churban Bayis Rishon, the first Beis Hamikdash, the lead up to it, the during, the post. And we have so much written in Gemara and in many, many Medrashim. The second Beis Hamikdash is a different story. We have a little bit in Gemara, and there's other works which are often quoted, some somewhat secular, etc. We know in the eyes of Chazal, in the works of Chazal, we know much more about the Churban of the first Beis Hamikdash. And that's what we're going to talk about, because we're still reeling from that. You see, when the second Beis Hamikdash came about, it was not a complete redemption. Things weren't back to where they once were. It says the elders that witnessed the building of the second Beis Hamikdash said, this is nishdas, this is not what it... There were many things missing in the second Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara says in Yuma, the Shechina was missing, one of the things. And the Oren, etc., wasn't the same. Many Yidden didn't come back to Eretz Yisrael by the second Beis Hamikdash. They stayed in Bavel. Life was decent in Bavel. It was easier to make a parnos in Bavel, apparently, than in Eretz Yisrael. So the truth is, historically, we never got our footing back from the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. And there's a lot more to talk about that, but that's just an introduction that for tonight's discussion, we're going to be analyzing the story of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash through the eyes of the prophet Yirmiyahu Hanavi. So the story begins, there was a king called Yoshiyahu. The Medrash Rabbah in Parshas Boy says that the Yidden are compared to the moon. In what way are we compared to the moon? A lunar month has about 30 days, 29 and a half days. For the first half, the moon is waxing and growing larger and larger. And in the second half, it wanes and it becomes more concealed until you can't see anything. So too says the Medrash the Yidden. For 15 generations, the Yiddish base and foundation was becoming stronger and stronger from Avraham, and you can count 15 generations gets you to Shloimeh. We'll do another time. You count Avraham, Yitzchak, Yankov, etc. You get to Shloimeh's number 15. And it says, in the times of Shloimeh, it's like the middle of the month, halfway through. 15 days, 15 generations. Nismalo diskus shel levana. The disk of the moon was complete. Where in Chassidus we're familiar with the words of the Zohar, Kaim osira ba'ashlemusa. The moon was complete. But in Medrash you have it in a different language, Nismalo diskus shel levana. The disk of the moon was complete. The Yiddish pride, the Yiddish monarchy, the Yiddish Commonwealth was at its zenith, at its peak. And after Shloim, unfortunately, it's kind of downhill from there. Starting with his son Rechavam, and then Aviyah and Asa, etc., until you get another 15, the second half of the month. And the second half of the month ends with Yoshiyahu. Yoshiyahu was a great king. He becomes king at the age of 8. His father, Ammon, was horrible, and he's gone a young man. Yoshiyahu becomes king at 8. It's a couple decades before the Churban. So we're going with the years of our tradition of the Seder Olam, that the Churban happens in 3,338. So the last 11 years are going to be Tzidkiyahu. The Common Era was a 422 BCE, is the not the secular tradition, which is in the 580s BCE. There's a 150-year discrepancy between our records and the Goyish records. But Yirmiyahu, so we're talking a little less than 500 BCE, okay, in our records. Yeah. Yirmiyahu rules for 31 years. So it's about 500 BCE. So about 2,500 years. Roughly, give or take. Well, you can work out the exact years. Because Yirmiyahu was a king for 31 years. He starts when he's 8, though. So though he was king for a while, he's gone at 39, young man. Yirmiyahu tried to create a revolution to bring the Jews back to the Eibishter. He made a Korban Pesach that the Jews had never seen. You know, he made incredible, he galvanized the Jewish people, and he really made a shturim to bring the people away from their acts of avodah zarah, and he was somewhat successful. But at the age of 31, something happens. There was a king in Mitzrayim, Egypt. His name was Paroi, known as Paroi Nechei, Paroi the crippled. He was crippled from Shlomo Melech's throne. This Paroi wanted to pass through Israel to have to wage a war, a battle with a country which lived northeast of Eretz Yisrael. So coming from southwest Egypt, he wanted, the quickest path was to go through Eretz Yisrael. So Paroi asked Yirmiyahu for permission for his armies to pass through Israel. And Yirmiyahu refused. Yirmiyahu was the Navi then, was one of the Nevi'im in the times of Yirmiyahu, and they were very close. They were very close. And Yirmiyahu told Yirmiyahu, what are you doing? He's not coming to harm, he's coming, he just wants a safe passage through. So Yirmiyahu said, don't you know what it says in Parshas B'chukaisai? If the Yidden listen to God, cherev loy saver ba'artzachem, a sword won't pass through your land, afilu cherev shel shalom, even peaceful sword. When you listen to you hearken to the instructions of God, Eretz Yisrael is so protected, no sword enters the land. So Yirmiyahu said, Yirmiyahu, the Jews cannot be categorized and described right now as in b'chukaisai shelechu. They're wanting in their service of God. Yirmiyahu said, no, the Jews are good. He said, we're deserving of the promise. I'm not letting Paroi in. And Yirmiyahu begged Yirmiyahu wouldn't budge. And Paroi was
perturbed,
highly disturbed, highly furious. He was mad. He was furious. He said, Yirmiyahu, okay, you don't give me safe passage, then I'll come in and attack. And his armies came. They found Yirmiyahu, they killed Yirmiyahu, they turned him into a sieve with 300 spears and blood pouring out. Yirmiyahu went actually to find all the blood of Yirmiyahu, the Medrash describes, try and find as much blood as he could to bury it. When Yirmiyahu writes in Eichem, we'll talk about it, Ruach Hapeinu Mashiach Hashem.
why was he punished?
Why was he punished? Yirmiyahu was the Navi, and Yirmiyahu instructed him that the Yidden are not deserving of that promise. You have to let Paroi in. By not doing that is suicidal. It was a bad decision on Yirmiyahu's part. Beis Hamikdash is no. Was it Yirmiyahu giving him a Nevuah? Let's assume so. But he said, why would? Okay, but you know, there's no chiyuv to listen. Eilav Tishmon is by a Navi. Okay, I don't know. We can analyze that another time. Was it a Nevuah? Was it not a Nevuah? If it was clearly a Nevuah, Yeshua would have listened. Eight, or maybe Yirmiyahu did hear it from the Eibishter, but he didn't tell Yeshua in the name of the Eibishter. I don't know. The Gemara in Tainus that talks about it. Either way, when Yirmiyahu says in Eicha Ruach Hapeinu Mashiach Hashem, the spirit, the breath of our nostrils, the anointed one of God, he was crying over his friend Yirmiyahu, how he died. Yirmiyahu, like the Medrash says in Parshas Bo, is king number 15, is the end of the lunar month. But the Beis Hamikdash is not yet destroyed. There are a few more kings, but they're puppet kings for other dominions. They're not one.
Was before?
Yeah, way before. Yeah. Chizkiyahu was before Menashe. You have Chizkiyahu, Menashe, Ammon, then Yoshiyahu. Fine. So Yoshiyahu is no longer. Paro instates Yoshiyahu's son Yehoiachaz to be a king. He's only a king for a few months. Then Paro takes Yehoiachaz in chains, takes him to Egypt, and that's it. He's off the radar. So Paro instates another son of Yoshiyahu. His name is Yehoiakim. Yehoiakim. He's going to rule for 11 years. One of the greatest tyrants Judaism and the world ever saw. Yehoiakim. The Gemara in Sanhedrin discusses how on his bris he engraved either the Eibishter's name, Yudkev, we discussed it by the Tatusha, or a name of an Avodah Zarah. The Gemara says that Yehoiakim said, all the kings before me, they never really knew how to get under God's skin. No one really knew how to tick him off. The earlier ones didn't really know how to really get to God. I know how to do it.
I think like competition.
Well, if he, he definitely would have gotten a medal. He definitely would have gotten a medal.
It's like you have a substitute in school.
So the Gemara says, he said, who needs God? Well, what do you need the Eibishter for? He provides light. We have certain gold and the jewels that sparkle. So the Chachamim told him, what do you mean? The pasuk says, "Liya kesef, liya zav, num Hashem tzvos." The money's also God. You can't say who needs God. We have money. The money's also God. He said it's not true. David HaMelech says in Tilim, "Hashamayim shamayim la Hashem v'haaretz nasam livnei adam." The heavens belong to God. The sun is God's. Earth He gave to us, and those precious stones exist on earth. We don't need His. The heavens belong to Him. The sun is His. Who needs it? That was a classic discussion. And he would, he killed people, he would take their wives, all types of things. And the Gemara, in fact, discusses this Yehoiakim. He was so awful, there's no reason he should get a portion in the world to come. Yet, in the Mishnah, in the end of Sanhedrin, it only counts 3 kings that don't have. Yeravam, Achav, and Menashe, who were all rotten, but the Gemara asked, how come Yehoiakim's not there? So the Gemara says a story. Actually, we'll come back to the story just to keep things in chronological order. We'll come back to this point if he'll come back in the world to come. But this Yehoiakim was awful and rotten. And he was a puppet king under Paro. Paro instated him in place of his father Yoshiyahu. And for a few years, Yehoiakim paid taxes and he was under the yoke of Paro's hashgacha, under Paro's watch. After he was king for a couple of years, there's a new guy on the block. His name is Nevuchadnezzar. Really Nevuchadnezzar II, but the famous Nevuchadnezzar. And he creates an empire in Bavel. Nevuchadnezzar's first battle, war that he won was over the Nineveh. After which he turns his attention towards Eretz Yisrael. And Nevuchadnezzar ascends from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, and he says, I'm not here to kill anyone. I just want you to know that until now you were answerable to Paro. From now on you're answerable to me.
Didn't he send someone in the time of Chizkiyahu?
Talking about Sancherif?
No, Nevuchadnezzar.
He himself, the first Sancherif, which is Machlekes, if it was him or Zayda, worked for, the first Nevuchadnezzar worked for Sancherif.
I'm talking about Shluchim from Bavel.
Yeah, Meroidach Baladon. Different story. Meroidach Baladon, different story. So, back to, where were we? So, Nevuchadnezzar says, I'm not here for blood, but from now on you answer to me. And that's what happened. He became a puppet king under Nevuchadnezzar. And that worked for a few years. During that time, Yirmiyahu was a very active Navi. He was already active in the times of Yoshiyahu. And he was very active in the times of Yehoiakim as well. Yirmiyahu spoke openly and publicly that the Yidden are addicted to Avodah Zarah and other crimes. Jerusalem will be destroyed. Yiddish blood will flow in the street. The temple will be destroyed. We're going to go into exile. Unless the Yidden to turn over a new leaf. He said it together with a friend of his, Uriah ben Shmayahu. Uriah was murdered by Yehoiakim. Yehoiakim was so incensed that these prophets are walking around saying such awful prophecies. Uriah was murdered, instructed by Yehoiakim. Yirmiyahu too. Yehoiakim wanted to kill Yirmiyahu too, but Yirmiyahu was a Kohen first of all, and Yirmiyahu had some friends in high places. Through connections he was spared, but he was thrown in prison. Yirmiyahu spent many years in prison. Yehoiakim was only a king for 11 years, but most of his reign, Yirmiyahu was in a prison cell. Lucky to be alive. A drop more introduction. So what happens? After a certain amount of time, Yehoiakim gets sick of Nevuchadnezzar. Nevuchadnezzar was a tyrant. Nevuchadnezzar was ruthless. He was hungry for power. And Yehoiakim had enough of him. And he reaches out to Pari and he says, let's make a peace treaty. I'm rejoining forces with you. I'm throwing off the yoke of Melech Bavel. And he did that. And Nevuchadnezzar hears about it. And it took a bit of time, but he finally comes to Eretz Yisrael. And this is in the 11th year of Yehoiakim's reign. Nevuchadnezzar surrounds Yerushalayim, the walled city. The Sanhedrin, this story is actually quoted in Medrash Rabbah in the end of Parshas Mitzorah. It's not in the papers. It's a fascinating story. Medrash Rabbah, end of Mitzorah, a must read. And the Sanhedrin, they exit the walls and they ask Nevuchadnezzar, they say, are you here to destroy the temple? Tell us, tell us what's going on. The suspense is killing us. Nebuchadnezzar says, no. I have a personal vendetta against Yehoiakim. He overthrew my sovereignty. I thought we had a deal. And the Sanhedrin went and to claim Yehoiakim. He said, you're going to hand me over to Nebuchadnezzar? Because you're worried he's going to kill you? You can't kill someone to... Ein doichen nefesh mipnei nefesh. You can't kill one person to save others. And they had a whole debate then, halachically, are you allowed to kill one person to save the masses? Especially if that one person will die anyways along with the masses. So what's the point of not giving him over? Either way, the Sanhedrin, when the debate ended, they took Yehoiakim and they passed him. He was refusing to go. They tied him on a rope and they passed him over the wall. He descends from the wall the other side. Nebuchadnezzar was standing there, he was like drooling. This is his... And there's a few opinions in Medrash how Yehoiakim died. It could be even before Nebuchadnezzar got hold of him. He had a heart attack as he was descending from the wall. Just seeing Nebuchadnezzar standing there with his eyes popping out of his head, Yehoiakim had a heart attack and died. Another opinion is Nebuchadnezzar took him and tied him to a horse and strode around Eretz Yisrael. Till Yehoiakim's body fell apart.
It's a Medrash that he dies from a heart attack?
Doesn't say the words heart attack, but push it out of fear, or he was an istinus. He was a king, had every delicacy in his life. This was the first time that he was stripped of all that, and not just stripped of all delicacies, but he was, yeah.
So it's a Medrash, okay.
Yirmiyahu gave a prophecy about Yehoiakim's death. He will be buried like a donkey. Kvuras chamor yikaver, buried like a donkey. So one opinion in Medrash says, just like a donkey is not buried, so he wasn't buried, his body was just scattered around. Another one says, no, you know where a donkey is buried? In the stomachs of animals that consume the dead donkey. That's where Yehoiakim's body went. Anyhow, Yehoiakim is gone, but Nebuchadnezzar is not interested in destroying Jerusalem. He just wants to appoint a new king, someone else he could trust. Yehoiakim's son, Yechoniah was chosen. Yechoniah was young. And he was placed as king by Nebuchadnezzar, thought he could trust him. He was only a king for a few months. You see, Nevuchadnezzar went to Bavel. He makes a big party to celebrate his conquest over Yehoiakim. His advisors tell him, you think Yechoniah is any better than his father? So he went back to Eretz Yisrael, and he said, the Sanhedrin again asked him, are you here to destroy? He said, no, I want Yechoniah, but this time I'm taking a nice piece of fish. Anyone that's worth their weight in salt, anyone that can contribute to the Commonwealth of Bavel, the Chachamim, the prophets, he took thousands of the best und the Shenste, like we say, the spiritual aristocracy. He took Mordechai, like it says in the Megillah. He took Yechezkel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, Daniel, etc., etc. And he takes them all to Bavel.
By force?
Yes, there was no choice. I mean, you could die. Yeah, but that's it. Yes. Yes, and they're good. Now you see I didn't make it up.
Yirmiyahu follow them?
Not at this point. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. At this point, Nevuchadnezzar, he wants to see Eretz Yisrael thrive under his auspices. So he tries one more king. The last son of Yoshiyahu. His name was Tzidkiyahu. And he's going to be a king for 11 years. From the year 3,327 till 3,338. So you had Yoshiyahu as a king. Then you had his son Yehoiachiz for 3 months gone. Then Yehoiakim for 11 years. Then Yehoiakim's son Yechoniah for 3 months. And the last guy is again for 11 years. So there's a pattern. And it's Tzidkiyahu, another son of Yoshiyahu.
Yehoiachin and Yechoniah.
Same person.
Yehoiakim's brother.
Yes. Last guy is Yehoiakim's brother, Tzidkiyahu. This Tzidkiyahu, and throughout all this, Yirmiyahu is a Navi. Tzidkiyahu is the last king, and he was appointed by Nevuchadnezzar. Okay, Tzidkiyahu was a great man. There happens to be a number of stiris. If one would then take an adventure through Gemara and Medrashim, you will find many contradictions if Tzidkiyahu was a tzaddik or a rasha. But the conventional acceptance of the Rishonim is he was a tzaddik. Tzidkiyahu was a great man. And for a number of years he was faithful to Nevuchadnezzar until he made the same mistake as his brother Yehoiakim. He threw off the yoke of Nevuchadnezzar. He reached out to Paro to make a peace treaty, a pact. They couldn't stand Nevuchadnezzar. And Nevuchadnezzar ultimately comes, and this time he's here to destroy. He lays siege. In the 9th year of Tzidkiyahu's reign, it was the month of Teves, the 10th of Teves. Nevuchadnezzar sent his chief butcher, Nebuzaradan, and they surround Jerusalem.
It wasn't just that they couldn't stand Nebuchadnezzar. They were very nationalistic and were upset that you had another army sitting and ruling over Israel.
But they were ready to go.
And Paro wouldn't. Well, he did, but Paro wasn't strangling them as much as Nebuchadnezzar.
And they were nationalistic, and that was their big problem.
But the question is, what would they gain by being under Paro? But you'll see, what happened was, this siege lasted either a year and a half or 2.5 years. It's unclear. But the reason it took so long is because Paro did send an army. Paro did keep his word. He sent an army, and Nebuchadnezzar's soldiers retreated. Until then, Paro's soldiers left, and Nebuchadnezzar came again. That's why it took a while. Until ultimately they broke through the walls, and then Tisha B'Av, they destroyed the Beis Hamikdash in the 11th year of Tzidkiyahu's reign. Yirmiyahu is alive through all of this. Okay, so now we have the history of the kings. Let's begin. So Yirmiyahu wrote his Sefer Yirmiyahu, and Yirmiyahu's Sefer is known as a book of dread. He was known as the prophet of doom. Join me in number 1. It's the Gemara in Brachas. Gimel Neviim Heim. There are 3 different prophets that if you see them in your dreams, it has a different meaning. Haroya Sefer Malachim. If you see the book of Malachim, which speaks all about the kings, Yitzpeh L'Gedula, you should look forward to greatness. Yechezkel, if you see Yechezkel, which begins with the chariot, the supernal chariot, Yitzpeh L'Chachma, you should await wisdom. If you see Yeshaya, Yitzbel Unachami. Yeshaya is a book of comfort. You should look forward to comfort. If you see Yirmiyahu in your dream, Yidig Mina Puranus, you should be concerned, punishment heading your way. Now, he wrote Malachim, there's a famous brisa that says that there are 3 types of people. One person that can count and one that can't. If you notice over here, it says there are 3 Nevi'im, and then it counts 4. So the Gura takes out Yeshaya, shouldn't be there. But either way, it says about Yirmiyahu, if you see Yirmiyahu, it's a bad omen. It's bad news. In fact, look at number 2 on the side, a Gemara in Baba Basra. The order of Nevi'im is Yeshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, Malachim. Chronologically, you would go Yeshaya, then Yirmiyahu, then Yechezkel. But the Gemara in Baba Basra says actually, the order is Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, then Yeshaya. That's the order the Gemara said. It's not chronological. It puts Yeshaya at the end instead of before Yirmiyahu. Yeshaya was well before Yirmiyahu. So the Gemara asks in number 2, Michti, hold on a second. Yeshaya kodim Yirmiyahu v'Yechezkel. Yeshaya chronologically preceded Yirmiyahu and Yechezkel. Likt mi Yeshaya Bereshus. Yeshaya should be listed first. Says the Gemara, let me explain. Kivon, since Malachim comes before these 3 anyhow. Soife, the end of Malachim speaks about the Churban of the first Beis Hamikdash. Yirmiyahu is kula churbana. Yirmiyahu is all about churban. That's why it comes next. Yechezkel, the beginning is churban, the end is comfort, so that's why Yechezkel's after. And Yeshaya kula nechmasa. Yeshaya is completely comfort. So therefore, samchinan churbana l'churbana, we put the destruction next to destruction, and nechmasa next to nechmasa, the comfort next to comfort. So what is the Gemara telling you? The book of Yeshaya is a book of comfort. Yirmiyahu is kula churbana. The whole thing is bad news, because his Sefer is talking about all the prophecies he gave during the times of Yehoiakim and Tzidkiyahu, that if the Yidden don't retract their actions, don't turn over a new leaf, there will be destruction. And we'll see he also gave some political prophecies, very important, we'll see that soon as well. But look in number 4, a very important medrash. It's in Yalkut Shemini. Yirmiyahu did not want to be a prophet. Yirmiyahu knew that the Eibishter was looking for someone to share bad news, and he did not want to do it. He did not want to do it. In fact, in the first parak, Yirmiyahu says, Eibishter, I'm nar, I'm young, I don't know how to speak, I don't want to. He gave out all the excuses, just like Moshe gave in the burning bush. And the Eibishter told Yirmiyahu, no. B'terem etzarcha b'peten yadaticha, before I formed you, I knew. You were chosen before you even created. This is your destiny. You cannot fight your fate. And wherever I send you, you will go. In fact, just look at number 10. Look at number 10 on the bottom of the page. It's a medrash in Shmos Rabbah. The medrash is discussing, jump to number 10 at the bottom right-hand side, just to mix things up. I see everyone's, just to wake you up a little. Moshe begged the Eibishter, don't send me. Yoina adamantly refused to go in his shlichus. Well, says the medrash, Kama bikish Yirmiyahu shaloylis, bikish begged God, I don't want to be a Navi. But v'nisnaba shaloy b'tavosai, whether he liked it or not, he had to do it. As it says in the beginning of Yirmiyahu, Al toimer nar anoich, Hashem says, don't say you're young. No, I'll call asher shlachachet. Wherever I send you, you will go. He pulled out the best excuse, the same excuse as Moshe. I can't speak, I'm young. You should know that Abarbanel, he writes that Yirmiyahu Taka was young, and his Lashon Kodesh was imperfect. And Abarbanel, if you look through the Sefer, the diktuk is off, the wording is no good. He's very critical of Yirmiyahu's, of the actual Hebrew, of the poetry and the beauty of the grammar and the Lashon Kodesh of the Yirmiyahu Sefer. And Abarbanel saying that's what Yirmiyahu was in honest concerned about, and it was truly a concern. The Malbim, a couple centuries after the Abarbanel, takes major issue with this comment. Who are you to speak about Yirmiyahu like that? and the Malbim wrote an introduction to Sefer Yirmiyah, a couple pages, where he attacks the Abarban on this point, and he defends Yirmiyah on all of the Abarban's questions. And he says Yirmiyah's Lashon Kodesh was perfect, and the poetry is fantastic, and there's absolutely no issue with Yirmiyah's grammar. But that's an interesting debate between the Abarbanel and the Malbim. The point of the Abarbanel is that Yirmiyah himself said this when he said, I don't know how to speak. He said those words, I don't know how to speak.
If an objective reading of it, if somebody would read it, would they say that is?
Well, the Abarbanel's there's lots of issues with grammar.
Are those objectively identifiable? What are the Malbim saying? It's not there. You don't see what you see.
That is okay. Yirmiyah has distinct style, different than other Nevi'im. It doesn't mean it's wrong. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It's not like Yeshaya. Those are all the differences that Abarbanel picks up on. But the Malbim says doesn't mean it's wrong. It's different. Doesn't mean you can explain.
The Abarbanel didn't say it was wrong.
He says
it's wrong, or he said it's just not
it's mistaken.
Said the Navi was mistaken in the Nevi'us, or he says the presentation wasn't.
Well, the book is his presentation. The book is how he wrote it down.
That's not. He's not saying that.
The book's written with Ruach HaKodesh, though. When there's a Navi that receives prophecy, they see a vision, except for Moshe who sees the thing itself. The prophets see a vision, and there's the way they perceive it, and then there's the way they speak it over to the best of their ability, and then when they write it down. But even when they wrote it down, it's Beruach HaKodesh. No, not every Navi wrote his Sefer, but Yirmiyah wrote his Sefer.
And half of Yirmiyahu's stories. It's a difference in opinion.
Okay, yeah, and not a half, and there is a nice chunk of stories there. All sad stories. There's no happy stories in Yirmiyah. Okay, let's go. Join me in number 4. Join me in number 4.
Either is or it isn't.
So number 4 is a Yalkut Shemayin in the beginning of Yirmiyah, where it's telling us the discussion that Yirmiyah had in the outset when he's trying to get off the hook. He's refusing. He's to the best of his ability. He's trying to get himself out of this shlichus the Eibush has designated for him, just like Moshe by the sneh. Says Yirmiyah, "Eini yochel lotzis." He says, "I can't." He says, "I can't do a proper job. Lo yodaiti dabra. I don't know how to speak. Hinar nochi. I'm young." Don't know the exact age. He began to prophesy in the 13th year of Yoshiyahu's reign. Yoshiyahu rules for 31 years. So you have all of that time, plus Yoakim 11 years. 11 years Tzidkiyahu, and also many years later. So we don't know the exact, but he was young. And so Amalei Ruach HaKodesh, Hashem said, perfect! You're young, that's the guy I want. Haloi lenar ani oyev. That's exactly what I want. Shaloi tam I dafka want someone who was too young to have sinned. Hashem says, I redeemed the Yidden from Egypt and I called them a Nar. It says, Nar Yisrael v'aveh. I love Yidden because they're young. Uba'avas Nar ani nizkut Yisrael. With the love of the youth, that's how I remember the Jews, as it says, Zacharti lo chesed norayich. Hashem tells Yidden, I remember the kindness that you showed when you were young. So Hashem says, Toilas HaKois hazeh, take this cup of anger. V'hashkes hagoyim. Hashem told Yirmiyahu, I want you to prophesize against the goyim. So Yirmiyah took the cup, so to speak, and he said, okay, which nation do I give to drink this poison first? Hashem said, Yerushalayim and Yehuda, because they're the head to all kingdoms. Yirmiyah says, Pititani Hashem va'epas. You seduced me and I was seduced. It's a pasuk in Yirmiyah. Yirmiyah says, Eibishter, you roped me into it and I was roped in. The story was Hashem told Yirmiyah, you're for the goyim. Navi la goyim nesatichon, Perek Aleph Yirmiyahu. You're a Navi for the goyim. Yirmiyah accepted. He said, which goy should I talk about first? Hashem said the Yidden. He was roped into it. And Yirmiyah, he said to God, you roped me into this. I was fooled. So when Yirmiyah heard that, he opened his mouth and he cursed the day he was born. It's a pasuk in Yirmiyah where Yirmiyah says, cursed is the day that I was born. In Yirmiyah it says, cursed is the day I was born, the day of my conception. Cursed be the man who told my father you had a baby boy. He would have cursed the doctor, he would have cursed the hospital, he would have cursed him.
He was good at this.
Besides God.
Yeah, well, he's going around the bush. He cursed. And why? Because he was involuntarily roped into being a prophet.
According to Wikipedia, he was about 24 years old when he, at the 13th year of
Okay, based on what are they saying that?
What did the men say, or someone about the age they were playing a game with him? Like, what was the age?
And
Couldn't just tell him to do it and do it any like.
Well, in the Psukim, and you read Perek Aleph of Yirmiyahu, that's what happens. Hashem said, don't say that you're young. Al Tomer Naranechi, finished. But in the Medrash, you see there was more to the discussion. In the Psukim, it doesn't have this discussion. It's Hashem said, no, it's not. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. So, but look back in number 4. So, Yirmiyahu said, you know what I'm like? I'm like a Kohen Gadol. That his goyrel was, there was a Kohen or a Kohen Gadol, the Gadol could be taken out. He comes to the Beis Hamikdash. It's his turn to take care of a woman who's a soita, a woman who was unfaithful or questionably unfaithful and has to drink the special waters. And he has to give the bitter waters, so they bring the woman to him. And he uncovers the woman and her hair. He gives the cup to give her to drink. You see, that's his mother. And he screams, ah! They told me today's my day. They didn't tell me it's my mother. He said, woe to me. He said, Mama, I always want, my whole life I wanted to honor you. And now I have to belittle you. So Yirmiyahu said as well, woe is to me upon you, my mother Zion, Yerushalayim. He said, I thought I thought maybe God shows me to give some good news. The bad news is for the Goyim. Hashem said there's a cup of chema, there's a cup of poison. That's for the Goyim. I thought that means for the Yidden, I'll be a prophet of comfort. And then the Eibusha turns the table and says, no. The first one you give that cup to are the Yidden. Hareini misnaba divrei puranos. You see how broken he was from the beginning, from the very beginning.
He was a genius, Mekayim.
What?
He was a good Mekayim.
Poor guy.
He was an expert.
He knew how to make you cry.
He cried too, we're going to see. What?
If she wasn't guilty of it, then I think the water that they were giving them.
Yeah. It was a bracha.
Right, exactly.
But still, the reason it was a bracha is because they went through such a degrading experience.
What percent?
The shame is it.
Fine. Join me in number 3.
What percentage of the Yidden were assimilated at that point in time?
assimilated.
And
Not many. Who lived in Eretz Yisrael? It was the Yidden. Who lived there? It was
but
many.
who weren't part of the program, who were doing it by design? What percentage?
Well, at this point, the 10 tribes were lost from the northern kingdom. The Yidden that were on the other side of the Jordan, Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh, and the 9.5 tribes in the northern kingdom, they were already gone. The Gemara in Megillah says Yirmiyahu tried to bring them back. Yirmiyahu traveled. We had a long share a long time ago. Yeah. The Gemara in Megillah and Erchin discusses Yirmiyahu brought them back. There's a debate in the Rishonim how many people he brought back. So we don't even know the numbers exactly. Those at this point though, it was only the Malchus of Yehuda, Binyamin, Levi, and maybe some individuals from the other tribes. So it was centered around Yerushalayim. People worshipped idols, but they were Yidden. They were.
So bad. What was so much put on this then?
Oh, what were their averis? Tons of idol worship. No, but not assimilation. That wasn't one of the.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Ezra later on.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it makes them not religious.
There was no shul. There was no davening yet. There was no shachris min chamaydev then. There was kriyishma in the morning and evening. It does say that during the first Beis Hamikdash, they had centers, shuls, where people would come and say kriyishma. There was no Shemoneh Esrei then, but to say kriyishma together. But imagine you came in, it was just a few minutes. They probably said a bit of Tehillim they had. Yeah.
But the problem was
Avodah Zarah was the big one. There was also murder, and there was Gilui Arayis. There was also immorality. No. It was widespread.
The 3 others, they give up your life for. That's what they excelled in.
Right. Look at number 3. It's also a medrash in Yalkut Shimoni. Yirmiyahu was one of 3 prophets at that time. Yirmiyahu wasn't the only one during the times, especially of Yoshiyahu. There was Yirmiyahu, there was Tzfanya, and there was Huldah, one woman, Huldah the prophetess. Yirmiyahu was misnaba b'shvakim. Yirmiyahu was in the street. Yirmiyahu was a prophet in the street. Tzfanya went into the shuls, and Huldah was by the Hadassah club. Huldah was by when the women got together and what?
You said there were no shuls.
No, I said for Kriya Shema they would come in. They would go and learn. They would go and learn. Bati Knesiyas means a place where they would gather. Knesiyas is a gathering. Shvakim is in the street, literally. You know, back in the day, the early Misnagdim would laugh at the Baal Shem Tov. He would get up in the marketplace literally and tell stories. And they would laugh at it. But the truth is, there's a clear medrash. Yirmiyahu misnaba b'shvakim. Yeah, Tzfanya went to the shuls. That was Tzfanya. Yirmiyahu was in the shul. That's where Yirmiyahu was.
I think the shul and the shvakim are in the same place.
Now we have them by the opposite.
Why? The shuk is the marketplace. Shvakim is marketplace. Okay. So, now that medrash, during the times of Yoshiyahu, things were more sane. And that's when the three of them were. But then we said there was Yehoyakim and then Tzidkiyahu. So both Yehoyakim and Tzidkiyahu were kings for 11 years. I mentioned during the reign of Yehoyakim, Yirmiyahu had a good friend, Uriah ben Shemayahu, was murdered. Yirmiyahu was luckily not murdered, but he was thrown in prison. Yirmiyahu spent most of those 11 years of Yehoyakim's reign, Yirmiyahu was in prison. An incredible story happens while he's in prison. Join me, number 7. It's a Gemara in Mayid Katan. The Gemara says, Sefer Torah shenifsraf minalan. If a Sefer Torah is burnt, who says you have to tear your clothes? Dichsiv, it says the following. When Yirmiyahu was in prison, it was during the 4th year of Yehoyakim's reign. So it was pretty early on in the 11-year catastrophic reign of Yehoyakim. Yirmiyahu already early on was in jail, in a prison cell. And he has a student next to him. His name is Baruch ben Neriah. And Yirmiyahu tells Baruch, I am going to recite verbatim. I want you to write it down in a scroll. And Yirmiyahu tells him, Eicha Yoshva, he tells him the first parak of Eicha, before the destruction. It was written as a prophecy. Eicha has 5 prakim. Yirmiyahu dictates to Baruch to transcribe Perek Aleph, Perek Beis, Perek Dalet. 3 chapters of Eicha. And Yirmiyahu tells Baruch, go out, you're a free, you can go on the street. I want you to publicize this. News reaches the king Yehoyakim that there's a scroll. You saw the latest news? There's a scroll that speaks about utter destruction of this entire country. Exactly. He was Dichsiv. So the pasuk it's in Yirmiyahu. The story is found in Sefer Yirmiyahu. Vahi kikro Yehudi shalosh lasos v'arba. A guy called Yehudi read the scroll in front of Yehoyakim, 3 or 4 psukim. Vayikro, and Yehoyakim the king tears it besar a with a blade of a sefer, and he threw it onto the fire, asher eloach, in the fireplace. It was during the winter that this happened. So the Gemara wants to know, why did it take 3 or 4 psukim until Yehoyakim burnt it? So the Gemara says a story, the 3rd line of number 7. The people told Yehoyakim, you heard, Yirmiyahu wrote a book of Kinnis, of lamentations. This is about 18 years before the destruction, when this happens. So Yehoyakim said, all right, what does it say? So they started reading. Alas, Yerushalayim, she sits alone. She says, who cares about Jerusalem? I'm not Malka. Ich bin dort der König, I'm the king. So they read the second pasuk. It starts with the letter Beis. Bachai sivka b'layla, Yerushalayim weeps. He says, let her weep, I'm the king. They read the 3rd pasuk. Yehuda has gone into exile, me'oini, from affliction. He says, let the Jews suffer, I'm the king. They say, the roads in Sion are veilous, all the roads in Yerushalayim are empty, there's no one here. He says, who cares, I'm the king. Then they read the 5th pasuk. Hayut sareho l'rosh, the oppressor became the head. You're no longer the king. He says, who says this? They continued reading. Ki Hashem hoiga ha'arayv pshaheha. The Eibishter is expressing this on all of the sins of the Jews. When he heard that, he cut out all of the names of Hashem and he burnt it on the fire. And it says there that all of those people that witnessed it, they weren't afraid, they didn't tear their clothes. From here you see they should have torn their clothes. That's where we learn a Sefer. If you witness a Sefer Torah being burnt, or even a part of a Torah scroll, you rend your garments. Any part of Tanakh. The Eibishter's names. Tosfos actually has a kasha that did he burn only the names of Hashem or the entire scroll? In the Psukim it's mashma the entire scroll, and the Gemara here says only burnt the names of Hashem. Tosfos doesn't give an answer. Fine. So this is a very important story that happened. The Psukim in Yirmiyahu say when Yirmiyahu hears that it was destroyed, Hashem tells you, Yirmiyahu, I want you to rewrite it. And this time it's double. Because Perek Aleph, Beis, and Daled all have 22 psukim each, going with the Aleph Beis. The third Perek that was added has 66 psukim. 3 for each of the Aleph. Literally double. Literally doubled. Okay, fine. So that's an extremely important episode that happened during the times of Yoyakim.
Where did Perek come from?
That was written, that's really part of an Achama, yeah. Look at number 5. Go up for a second, number 5. The Gemara in Baba Kama says, do you know how harassed Yirmiyahu was? Besides for living in prison. It says, and look at number 5. It says in Yirmiyahu, Kikaru shuchol levachdeni. They dug a pit to trap me. Upachim tom l'raglai. And traps they hid from my feet. Rabbi Lazar says, Chashdu mizoyna. Rabbi Lazar says, everyone on the street said, Yirmiyahu! He lives with a prostitute. Now what's the big deal? Yeshua also married a Zayna. Roch, you know what the big deal is? Yirmiyahu is a Kohen. That's the big deal. Rav Shik is not allowed to be. Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani says, no, it was worse. Chashtu me'eshes ish. The word on the street was, he sleeps with other men's wives. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, Korach spread similar rumors about Moshe Rabbeinu. We had a shir years ago about that. So Yirmiyahu on the street, he was harassed. These were the rumors. That's what people had to say. He spends years in prison. In Yirmiyahu, there's a pasuk where Hashem tells Yirmiyahu, you're not to get married, you're not to have kids. Many believe Yirmiyahu never got married and never had children. However, there is a record of 2 children Yirmiyahu had. One of them is that he had a child called Yechezkel. The famous Navi Yechezkel is Yirmiyahu's son. How so? Yechezkel is called Yechezkel ben Buzi. The Radak, in the beginning of his commentary on Yechezkel, quotes from Yerushalmi that says, why was Yechezkel called the son of Buzi? Buzi means to degrade, to belittle.
He was a Kohen too.
That's right, exactly. So must be it's his son. So Yechezkel was the son of Yirmiyahu. You know why Yirmiyahu was called the belittled one? Well, you see, they made fun of him. Because Yirmiyahu comes from Rochav, the Zayna who married Yeshua. That already the Gemara says in Megillah, that Yirmiyahu's Baba was Rochav. So the Jews told Yirmiyahu, you're here chastising us that God's going to throw us out of the land because of our acts of impropriety. You know where you come from, you know what your Baba was up to? They belittled Yirmiyahu to the point that his nickname was the belittled one, Buzi. That's what the Radak said, which means Yirmiyahu had a son, Yechezkel. In addition, look at number 6. This is from the Seder HaDoros. He says, if you look in Likutei Maharil from hundreds of years ago, that Yirmiyahu had a child. His name was Ben Sira. Now, he's a person to talk about him and his sefer, lots to talk about, right? Who was Ben Sira? He was the son of Yirmiyahu. And Ben Simra's mother was Yirmiyahu's daughter. Did I just say that? Yeah. Yes. No. Something they only say once. You either heard it or not. Yirmiyahu, that Ben Sira was Yirmiyahu's son, and his mother was Yirmiyahu's daughter.
Mother
was Yirmiyahu's daughter. Yirmiyahu and his daughter had a kid called Ben Sira. Now, how did that happen? It says, Nis'abra ba'ambati. She was in a bath, and somehow there was some zera from Yirmiyahu in the bath. How the zera got there, no explanation. Somehow it entered into her, and she conceived and had a child called Ben Sira. Now, in most sources where this story is found, it says Ben Sira was the son of Yirmiah, but it doesn't say who the woman was. In here, it says the woman was Yirmiah's daughter. So it means Yirmiah had a kid, but he didn't get married.
He's not considered a mom.
But he had a daughter. So you have to account for his daughter. Which means he had a son, Yechezkel perhaps. He had some daughter. And then there's this Ben Sira. Now that story has a lot of halacha to talk about. How did he have a daughter?
Yeah.
What's the halachic status of this?
Somebody else was in the bath before. No, but listen. He was Chas v'Shalom, but not in Yirmiyah. He was told not to get married, not to have children. But it says b'makom hazeh in this place, so it could be somewhere else he was allowed to go. Okay, maybe, maybe. But let's just go weiter. So we don't know about a wife, his children, a mystery. We know there were horrible rumors about him. He spent most of those years of Yehoiakim's reign in prison. Okay. Then we said Yehoiakim dies in the hands of Nevuchadnezzar. So, and now Tzidkiah, or Yochanan was there for a couple of months, fine. And then Tzidkiah is the last king for 11 years. Tzidkiah was a good man, we mentioned before, and he respected Yirmiyahu greatly. And Yirmiyahu spent a bit of time now, he was on the street, he was able to get some fresh air. He was a highly unpopular fellow. Nobody liked to hear what he had to say. He was a man of bad, he was walking bad news, you know? One of the, you can make like a walking New York Times or something. He was just.
What the Rebbe would have said about it.
Yirmiyah he didn't want to do this. It pained him. He didn't want to do this. So let's get going. So at some point, Yirmiyah ran afoul of a group of people who found him, beat him up to a pulp. He was beaten up a few times, recorded and saved. A few times he was pushed. People would meet him in a street corner and beat him up to a pulp. And one time it was so bad, they didn't just beat him up, they then threw him in a prison. In a deep, dark cell. No, this was even worse. In a deep, dark cell. It says it was so awful, Yirmiyah Pasha worried he was going to die just from the living conditions of the deep, dark cell. How long was he there? It says in Yirmiyah, Yomim Rabim, a long time. If that wasn't enough, at some point these hooligans came and they famously threw him into a pit of quicksand. And he was dying in it was mud, but we nicknamed quicksand, but it was mud. He was literally dying. They threw him into mud and he couldn't keep himself afloat. And Baruch ben Neriah, in the Psukim is referred to as Eved Melech, the servant of the king. The Kushi, he's referred to.
Was it the same person?
The Pirkei T'Blezer, it says in many Midrashim, it was Yirmiyah's servant, his faithful student, Baruch. Baruch ran to Tzidki, he says, Yirmiyah's Pasha dying! So Tzidki said, get a group of people, go save him quick. Baruch went with a group of fellows, they came with ropes and everything. The whole thing's described in the Psukim. They threw and they told Yirmiyah, hold on, we're going to pull you out. They pulled him out of this quicksand, the nick of time. He barely survived. So Tzidkiah said, from now on, I'm going to lock you up for your safety. And he enters a new place called the Chotzer HaMatorah, the courtyard, the Matorah, that's just the nickname it had, which was it was a cell, but it was much better living conditions than he had before, and Yirmiyah was happy. He was partially locked in there now for his own safety, And that's where Yirmiyah is going to be until the end of Tzidkiyahu's reign. We said Tzidkiyahu was a king for 11 years. In the beginning, he was under Nevuchadnetzar. And Nevuchadnezzar respected Tzidkiyahu a lot. And he told Tzidkiyahu, all the other kings, they want to come visit me, they have to make an appointment. You, open door policy. You can come, open door policy. Just come in and say hello. And once, this is a Gemara in Nedarim that says this story. One day, Tzidkiyahu enters Nebuchadnezzar's chambers unannounced. He sees Nebuchadnezzar eating a live rabbit. Nebuchadnezzar said, swear to me you won't tear a soul. He swore. Later on, Tzidkiyahu was sitting in the company of some of the other kings that were under Nebuchadnezzar's reign. And they were, schmutz was being passed around about Nebuchadnezzar. And Tzidkiyahu couldn't hold himself back. He says, you want to hear a good story? He told them the story. News reaches back to Nebuchadnezzar, he's furious. And that's one of the reasons why he wants to knock off Tzidkiyahu and destroy Yerushalayim, because of this story. The simple reason is, we mentioned, Tzidkiyahu broke away and he made a peace treaty, a pact with Paroi. And Nebuchadnezzar comes, he surrounds on Asara B'Tevis through his student Nebuchadnezzar, and Jerusalem is under siege. The siege lasts, we said, either a year and a half, 2.5 years. During the siege, Yirmiyahu is in this Chatzar HaMatorah, that's where he is. And Tzidkiyahu, time and time again, asks Yirmiyahu, what does God say? What's God saying? So Yirmiyahu said, what I've been saying for the last 2 decades is actually happening. No one believed me. It's actually happening. And Yirmiyahu said, but it's not over. Yirmiyahu said, any Jew that walks out of Jerusalem, waves a white flag to Nebuchadnezzar, will not be harmed. And Yirmiyahu said, if you wave the white flag against the pressure of all of your advisors, Jerusalem will not be destroyed, you will not die, there'll be somewhat of a happy ending, a decent ending. If you're adamant to continue to fight, which was the advice of all the Jews then, no, we're going to fight to the end, we're not going to wave the white flag. Yirmiyahu said, I'm telling you in the name of God, you will die, your children will die, your family, Jerusalem will be full with spilled Jewish blood. But Tzidkiyahu, there was so much pressure from the people around him, he couldn't follow through. And ultimately, there were, by the way, some Jews that did hearken to Yirmiyahu, and they left, and Nebuchadnezzar appreciated them, and they were left alive. Unfortunately, the walls of Jerusalem fall in Tammuz, and it just took a few weeks until the Beis Hamikdash was set. They entered the Beis Hamikdash on the 7th of Av, and they danced around, played, partied there, and then on Tisha B'Av they set it on fire. When many Jews were murdered, Rahman al-Islan, but a colossal amount were taken as slaves, prisoners of war, taken in chains back to Bavel. Taken in chains back to Bavel. Only a few remained by order of Nebuchadnezzar, so Eretz Yisrael shouldn't become a desolate land. It needs some farmers to keep to keep things going.
It's a lot of people, hundreds of thousands.
Yes. Look at number 8. This is a medrash in Koheles Rabbah. At Moitze you find Mishah shegolsa galusa shel Tzidkiyahu. When the golus of Tzidkiyahu reached Bavel, Yatzas golus Yechanya lekrasam. Remember, there were 10,000 Jews or more that have already been in Bavel for 11 years. Mordechai, all the others that went with Yechanya, were in Bavel already for 11 years when there's a new wave, the second wave. So the golus Yechanya went to greet the golus of Tzidkiyahu. But the golus of Yechanya, those that have been there for 11 years, were already Babylonian citizens. They had to support Nebuchadnezzar. It's a medrash. Mechusim sakim mibifnim. On the inside they wore sackcloth. But mibachutz they had to say, Nebuchadnezzar, you did well. Because they were citizens now of Bavel. But quietly they asked their friends, they asked each other, how's my father, how's my mother, how's my brother? And they told them they're all dead. They're all killed. And the Jews that heard that news in Bavel, with one hand they cried, but they couldn't express that. They were officially had to support Nebuchadnezzar. With the other hand they praised Nebuchadnezzar. So, can you imagine? With one hand they cried over the bad news, but in the other they had to put on a show, as if Nebuchadnezzar, receive him with greetings, etc. Incredible statement of the Medrash. Number 9 is an absolute whopper. This is a heartbreaking Medrash. I hope you have you need a stomach for this. This is from the Medrash called Psikta Rabasi in the 26th parsha. Halach loy ledarkoi. According to this Medrash, At the time of the actual destruction, Yirmiyahu was not in Jerusalem. He was in his hometown called Anossos, not too far away. And he sees the Beis Hamikdash burning. And he thinks, well, maybe the karbanos are back on. But he knows in his heart that's not what the smoke is. He began to scream and say, Be'eze derech holchu lehem chatoim. This is Yirmiyahu, Yirmiyahu talking. This was, by the time he came, the Jews had already been taken in chains. They started their talucha to Bavel. They were on their way to Bavel. He said, where have the sinners gone? Where have the lost people gone? I want to go and be lost with them. So he walked, and he saw the Shvil Mole Dam, the paths were full of blood. And the Aretz Murubetzes, the land was covered with the blood of the slain from all sides. He faced the earth and he saw Parshas Raglayim. He saw the footsteps of little babies, Yoinkim, V'oilalim, that went in captivity. He bent and he kissed the earth. He kissed the footsteps of these babies. And when he reached the exiles going, Gifafon Unashakon, he hugged them, I guess these kids, and he hugged them and he kissed them. And he cried towards the kids. And they cried again. They cried to him. And he told the Jews, my brothers, you know why this all happened? Because no one listened to a word that I said. And in another medrash it says he actually put himself in the chains, literally walking with them. When they came to the Nahar Pros, the Euphrates River, Nevuah was the chief butcher, was instructed by Nevuchadnetzar to keep a good eye on Yirmiyahu. And we'll talk more about that. And Nevuah told Yirmiyahu, you have to make a choice. We're hitting the area of Bavel. If you want, come to Bavel. Otherwise, go back to Israel. So Yirmiyahu thought to himself, wait a second. In Bavel, you know who came here 11 years ago? Big Nevi'im. Bavel has Jewish infrastructure. Who's left in Israel? There's nobody in Israel. If I go to Bavel, who's going to comfort those that stay in Israel? So he left. And the exiles looked up and they saw Yirmiyahu leaving. And they began crying, Bekel Ram, and they screamed, Avinu, Tata Yirmiyahu, how could you leave us? And they cried, and this is what it means, Al Naras Bavel Sham Yashavnu. On the rivers of Bavel we sat and we cried, because Yirmiyahu, they said, Tata Yirmiyahu, how could you leave us?
Suddenly he became the favorite prophet.
And Yirmiyahu responded and he said, I swear with heaven and earth, if you would have cried one tear in Jerusalem, this wouldn't have happened. Now you're crying. Now you're crying. If you would have cried one tear in Jerusalem, you wouldn't have been exiled. And Yirmiyahu turned away, and he himself was crying. And he said, Nebuch to you, most precious of all countries. He made his way back to Eretz Yisrael. Look at number 11. This is in Medrash Rabban Eicha, where the story continues. Ubachazirasi, on his way back home, Hoyemoitze, he found etzbois mekutoin, cut fingers, strewn across the mountains. He gathered, well, the Mefarshim say actually when the Yidden were walking, barefoot, rocks and everything, that people's toes literally fell off.
This is not the story of the Levim who cut.
No, not the different story. He gathered all these fingers or toes, umegapfon, he hugged them, and he kissed them, and he put them in his talus. He gathered. But he was a kohen. How was he allowed to do this? How was he allowed to get the blood of Yoshiyahu and bury it?
There was no one else.
I Meis Mitzvah. Others say Yoshiyahu was a tzaddik. The blood of Yoshiyahu didn't give off tumah, or at least until the burial, and that's for another time. But he said, Bonai, Yirmiyahu screamed, my children, I told you, I said, years earlier, I said, give glory to the Eibishter, but Terem Yachshich, before it gets dark.
How have I told you so? It's from him.
Well, this pasuk he said, the pasuk he said at the time. The Medrash is, referring to it years later. But at the time, he told them, before it gets dark, it's going to get dark one day. B'terem yachsheh, it's going to get dark. Before your feet get hit on the mountains of darkness, give glory to God. And he was so pained to see years later the prophecy fulfilled. Look at the next page, number 12. Al Oisa Shah. At that moment when he was on the mountains, he said a new prophecy. On the mountains I lift up my cry. On that mountain he wailed. He wailed. He cried big time on that mountain when he saw all those toes and fingers. Yes. What happens then? So then Yirmiyahu goes back to Eretz Yisrael, and he's there, fine. Then Nevuchadnezzar appoints a guy by the name of Gedaliah, the son of Achikam, to be the governor, to bring some law and order, to try and recreate some normalcy in the land. And the problem is, there's a whole story of a Gedaliah was murdered by another Jew. Not for now, that whole debacle. But the Jews, right? The Jews, the survivors, were so afraid that Nevuchadnezzar had appointed Gedaliah, and he was murdered by Jews. Nevuchadnezzar is going to come. Literally, he's going to wipe Israel clean from any Jew. They were so afraid they wanted to go to Egypt. And they told Yirmiyahu, ask God what to do. Whatever he says, we'll listen. 10 days later, Yirmiyahu gets a prophecy. He says, God has said, don't go to Egypt. He says, you want to know what the Eibishter says? Stay here. You're afraid of Nebuchadnezzar fakert. God will place in Nebuchadnezzar's heart a spirit of softness, a soft spirit, and he'll tolerate you and you'll flourish. If you go to Egypt, I swear by God, he says, God says, Nebuchadnezzar will hunt you down. And the Jews told Yirmiyahu, we told you we would listen to whatever you say in the name of Hashem, but we think you made this up. That's what they said. So we're going to Egypt, and they schlepped Yirmiyahu to Egypt. He was schlepped to Egypt with them. What happens in Egypt? What happens in Egypt? Look at number 19, the bottom of the page for a second. You'll never believe this. It's in a sefer called Medrash Haggadah. Printed 100 years ago, a little more, by a big scholar, Buber. Martin Buber's grandfather. And it says in this Medrash like this. Yeah, Shlomo Buber. Martin Buber actually, as a kid, grew up in his Zayda's house for a bit, because his parents divorced. And his Zayda Shlomo Buber was an incredible expert in Medrashim, printed many old manuscripts with footnotes. And it says like this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Eichicham. In Egypt, the Eibishter continued to speak to Yirmiyahu, to rebuke the Yidden. And you know what happened? The Jews stoned Yirmiyahu to death. Asher rogmu oisai b'nei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim. In Egypt, the Yidden stoned Yirmiyahu to death, according to this Medrash. And the Egyptians buried him. You know why the Egyptians loved him? They loved him because he davened on some fish. There's a word here, hismono. I don't know what that means. We know that Egypt was b'chal plagued by crocodiles. It says here there was some type of fish in the Nile killing the Egyptians. It could very well be the crocodiles, I don't know. But whatever it was, Yirmiyahu came and he made a seder. He davened and he fixed the issue. And the Egyptians appreciated him, so the Egyptians buried him. Continues the Medrash, Alexander the Great took Yirmiyahu's bones and buried them in Alexandria. When Alexander the Great created the city, or Alexandria in Egypt, he fortified it with the merit of the bones of Yirmiyahu. Now, this is a fascinating Medrash. According to all other Jewish sources, something else happened to Yirmiyahu. I'll get there.
It also says he was going around in Egypt the Jews were asking him, why did God do that? No?
He did get Nevuah in Mitzrayim. But at some point, they killed him, according to this Medrash. He was just rebuking them too much. They said, enough! Genukshan, enough! By the way, Nevuchadnezzar did end up coming to Mitzrayim, and he did end up killing all the Jews that were there. Exactly as Yirmiyahu forewarned, Yeah. So look at number 14, go back up. This is from the Seder Hadoros, a fascinating story. This is the Seder Hadoros, Rabbi Yechiel Halpern, 300 years ago, quoting from the Shalshelas HaKabbalah, which we said was the very unreliable sefer from 500 years ago. But he says he saw in a commentary on the Kuzari, the sefer, the Kuzari, the commentary was made by Rabbi Nasanel Ibn Kaspi, that Plato said, I was with Yirmiyahu in Egypt. There is an old record that the philosopher Plato wrote, I was with Yirmiyahu in Egypt. Ubitchila, originally I laughed on Yirmiyahu and everything he said. Later I saw that his words were the words of God. He was a wise man, he was a prophet. That's what the Shalshelas HaKabbalah saw in a commentary by some Reb Nasanel Ibn Kaspi. Says the Seder Adoris, if you look in the Ramah's Sefer Torah Sa'il, it's there as well. Hold on. In the Litvische world, there is a well-known story that they've been telling for a couple generations. The following story, that Yirmiyahu the prophet was in Egypt, that we know for sure, that's in Sefer Yirmiyahu. Plato was in Egypt. Plato's from Greece, but he spent a bit of time in Egypt. Plato sees this Jewish rabbi Yirmiyahu, he laughs at him. What is this old man with the long beard, what does he know already? And specifically, Yirmiyahu was crying a whole day. Yirmiyahu was a bitter man. He wasn't happy in Egypt. He was taken there against his will. And who wants to live in Egypt? It's hot. It's, who wants to live? Right? You ever saw someone in Florida? People, it's hot. It's boiling hot. Anyhow, but here we're all happy because there's air conditioning. But imagine to walk on the street a whole day. Anyhow, Yirmiyahu was in a sulken mood, and one day Plato strikes a conversation. He says, Rabbi, he says, you're busy crying over the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the temple. It was a building, rock, wood. That's what you're crying for. And number two, what happened. Your tears aren't going to bring it back. You're crying, it's the past. So Yirmiyahu asked him, do you have any philosophical issues not yet resolved? So Plato chuckles, he says, there are many issues which I think Bechlal are beyond human comprehension, human grasp. So Yirmiyahu says, try me. So Plato asks him a number of questions, and Yirmiyahu answers it all. And Plato is flabbergasted. He's where'd you get this knowledge from? Yirmiyahu says, from the house of wood and rock. So Plato said, you answered my first question. Please answer my second question, which was what happened. And Yirmiyahu said, I would, but you wouldn't understand. That's the story. And they all quoted from the Sefer of the Ramah, Torah Sa'ila. If you look in the Sefer, the story's not there. I think Reb Chaim Kanievsky said he thinks it's actually from Goyish sources, this story. But either way, you do have a record here that Plato said, originally I scoffed at Yirmiyahu, but then I spoke to him and I realized he was a Chacham and a Navi. You don't have the whole story here, but you do have this interaction between Yirmiyahu and Plato. B'chlal, it's known the Kabbalists very much appreciated Plato's teachings, and the philosophers, Jewish philosophers, appreciated generally the teachings of Aristotle. But the Mukabalim were Platonists, Neoplatonists, etc. So, okay. So either Yirmiyahu was killed, buried in Egypt, and then Alexander brought his bones to Alexandria. According to the Abarbanel, when Nevuchadnezzar came to Egypt and killed all the Jews that were there, he didn't kill Yirmiyahu. He said, now's your turn to come to Bavel. He took him to Bavel. The Arizal believes, and others, many believe, that Yirmiyahu is actually buried in Yerushalayim. In the Chatzer HaMatorah, in that cell he was placed for his own protection by Tzidkiyahu, if you find that, is actually buried there. Amen. So either he ended his years in Yerushalayim, in Eretz Yisrael, or in Bavel, or in Egypt. But I want to finish with the following. The fact is, Nevuchadnezzar had a soft spot for Yirmiyahu. Nevuchadnezzar told Nuzvuzaradon, the chief butcher, keep your eye on Yirmiyahu. It's a clear pasuk in Yirmiyahu. I want you to take care of him. Whatever he asks, go along with it.
For obvious reason.
Why did Nebuchadnezzar love Yirmiyahu? So you're probably thinking, because Yirmiyahu supported him. Politically, Yirmiyahu supported him. It's like the Alter Rebbe, the family, the Schneersons were given special rights and protection from the Tsar, because the Alter Rebbe in the war between the Tsar and Napoleon supported the Tsar. So you would think, in fact, that's the simple understanding. Yirmiyahu, for years, prophesied about Nebuchadnezzar's success, and he gave every effort that the Jews should wave the white flag. Many Jews did. exit Jerusalem's walls and join Nevuchadnezzar in the name of Yirmiyahu. So Nevuchadnezzar was aware of that and he appreciated that. But come the Kabbalists and say it's much more than that. There's much more going on. Look in number 13 first, before you see the bomb of the Kabbalists. The Chidah in his Sefer Midbar Kedemus quotes a manuscript that he found. Listen to this. He says, first of all, Yirmiah the prophet was a Gilgul of Shlomo HaMelech. First you should know that. V'haya lo kiruv dasim Nevuchadnezzar. Yirmiah was buddy buds, very good buds, on good terms with Nevuchadnezzar. And Nevuchadnezzar instructed Nevuzaradon very much to take care of Yirmiyahu. Says the Chidah, I found in a Medrash Eichok Savya, the manuscript, something new. It says the following. Hashem told Yirmiyahu, go to the city of Anossos. Because this is at the time of the Churban. Because as long as Yirmiyahu was in Jerusalem, the enemies couldn't enter. According to this Medrash, do you know why the siege took so long? Because Yirmiyahu's physical presence in Yerushalayim did not allow the forces of Bavel to enter. So Hashem told Yirmiyahu, you got to go, you got to leave. Therefore Hashem sent him to the city of Anossos. He went. Immediately after Yirmiyahu exited, the enemies entered. They burnt the city in the Beis Hamikdash. And Yirmiyahu now wants to come back. Ubo ad chatzi haderech, he's halfway between Anossos and Jerusalem. He ascended a certain mountain near Yerushalayim, about 3 mil.
Anossos is in the north, no?
In Erev Binyamin. He's 3 kilometers from Jerusalem. He sees lots of smoke. Yirmiyahu tore his clothes. He put afer on his head. And he was crying and walking. And he went quickly. You know why? Let's look at this story. Because many years before, when Yirmiyahu was a kid, and Nevuchadnezzar was also young, they were friends from decades before. Before Nevuchadnezzar Bechlal became a king, he and Yirmiyahu were friends. And they once went on a spatzir, Mataylim Yachad, they were walking together. That is before Nevuchadnezzar was a king. Nevuchadnezzar was a poor man, he was a schlepper, he was a nobody.
He was dreaming he's going to become a...
Doesn't say that. I'm sorry, it does say that right away, yeah. He was a nobody. He was a chacham, okay. For some reason, Yirmiyahu and Nevuchadnezzar were friends already then. And Nevuchadnezzar, like you said, if only one day I would be a king over the whole world, I would come to Shloim, I would burn the place down. I would burn the temple and the city, I would kill everyone. Any survivors, I would take them in captivity. That's what he's telling his good friend Yirmiyahu. You know?
What was his motive?
Hold on, listen to the end.
live in the same country.
Where was Yirmiyahu before Yirmiyahu became a Navi? Where did he live? Who knows? Yirmiyahu went to get the 10 lost tribes. It says in Gemara. Who knows how long he spent for that? Who knows?
He was young, he was very young.
Even though that might have been actually after he became a Navi. But either way, Yirmiyahu saw in Ruach HaKodesh that Taka Shoy Medeslay. Right now, this is Nebuchadnezzar's day, and whatever he says is going to be. So Yirmiyahu asked Nebuchadnezzar, at least give me Yerushalayim. He said, no. You understand, there are kids. So Yirmiyahu said, okay, at least give me the Beis Hamikdash. He said, no. At least give me the kids. He said, no. I'm going to kill the kids too. So Yirmiyahu said, so what will you give me? I'm doch your friend. What would you give me? So Nebuchadnezzar, I'll tell you like this. Whatever you're able to save on that final day, from midday until the evening. So years later, Yirmiyahu is on top of this mountain. It's late in the day. He's running. Ulakach mir, that's why he ran fast to come to Yerushalayim, but he didn't make it. V'loi bo ado erev, he came too late, he couldn't save a soul. And that's why he says in Yirmiyahu, it says that Oy lanu kiponu hayoim, woe to us, the day is past. It's already evening. Says the Chidah, that's what I found in a Medrash Eicha manuscript. So what's the meaning of this? They were good friends even when they were younger. If the reason, what you said, is because of political reasons, that won't explain why years earlier they were hanging out. Nebuchadnezzar was this Jew hater, and yet Yirmiyahu was a buddy with him. How do you explain that? So, here's the deal. There was a woman called the Queen of Sheba. She hears about Shlomo's wisdom. She travels to Jerusalem, and posits a number of riddles to Shlomo HaMelech. And then as far as the Psukim are concerned, she gives Shlomo some gifts and then she leaves. Well, where does it say that? If you look in a Sefer Malachim, in Rashi, there is a parenthesis, inserted by we don't know who, where it says that the Arizal says that Shlomo converted her and they had children. Arizal's yard site's tonight. Guess whose yard site is today? Reb Menachem that's tonight. Reb Menachem Azariah of Panu. The Rameh mi Panu. And his classical sefer is Asara Mamoris. And we were going to give a shiur all about him, but at least we're going to quote him. In number 15 says the Asara Mamoris. V'loi zocha Nevuchadnetzar likara. You know why Nevuchadnetzar was referred to as a lion in a prophecy of Yirmiah? He comes from David HaMelech. He comes from Shlomo. Because Shlomo married the queen of Sheba, Malka Sheva, and Nevuchadnetzar is a descendant. Mimalka Sheva achrei shegira. Shlomo
Could be Jewish.
So the consensus is that Shlomo and the queen of Sheba, he was Megayer her. They had a daughter, but generations later,
Grandfather.
Nevuchadnezzar was generations later, but he had the blood of David HaMelech.
300 years later.
He had the blood
Yeah.
of Shlomo, 'cause he's a Gilgul.
And the blood of Shlomo. Exactly, yeah. Good. So the Rameh Pan, look at number 16, he continues. Nevuchadnezzar conquers Yerushalayim. The Beis Hamikdash, but also the king's palace. He took all the riches of the king. Says the Rameh, it was his money. It was all the money his Baba, the queen of Sheba, had brought to Shlomo HaMelech. Who he says in number 16. V'ulam however, mishaloi nosnuloi. It was his own riches that were given back to him, to Nevuchadnezzar, the gold of Jerusalem. Much of it was given by his Baba to the king Shlomo. And then he says in the next line, Nevuchadnezzar didn't even know why he loved Yirmiyahu. He didn't know the reason. But his mazel in heaven, the source of his soul, knew. He was an Einakul of Shlomo. Yirmiyahu embodies the soul of Shlomo.
Yehoiakim was also
So-
an Einik of Shlomo. He didn't like Yirmiyahu.
Yehoiakim was embodiment of Shlomo.
No, but he was an Einik of Shlomo.
Okay, so it's a 10th cousin. Shkoich. No, Yirmiyahu was a Gilgul of Shlomo. Yirmiyahu, that's what it said in number 13, the first line. Yirmiyahu was a Gilgul of Shlomo. And the Nevuchadnezzar comes from Shlomo. This was his Zayden, a new body. And that's why he had so much pity on Yirmiyahu. Like it's clear in the Pasuk that he instructed the chief butcher, take Yirmiyahu and watch over him. Look at number 17. This is the Chidah in his commentary, Bris Olam, on the Sefer Chassidim. The Sefer Chassidim wants to know when Sancheriv came to destroy Chizkiyahu, 100 years plus before Yirmiyahu, about 100 years, the Sancheriv came with an army of 180,000 soldiers. All of them were wiped out. Malach came, the whole army was killed except for 10 people. One was Nevuchadnetzar. Some say this was Nevuchadnezzar Zayda, but he still had the same name. The Sefer Chassidim wants to know, why did Nevuchadnezzar survive that war? The Sefer Chassidim says because God saw that in the future, Nevuchadnezzar's Einakul, the second Nevuchadnezzar, would be good to Daniel, would be good to Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, till he cast them into the fire, would be good to Yirmiyahu, etc. So Nevuchadnezzar had his chus, and that's why he was saved by that incident with Sancheriv years earlier. Says the Chidah of Al Derech, you want to know the truth? Yesh Tuf Tam. I'll give you the real reason why Nevuchadnezzar survived that war. Because he has the blood of Shlomo in his veins. Ki Nevuchadnezzar comes from the seed of Shlomo. He lived with the queen of Sheba and they had a daughter. From there comes Nevuchadnezzar. So it wasn't just a grandson, it was a great-great-great-great-grandson. It comes out that Shlomo built the bias and his own Einakul would destroy it. These are from the secrets of the one who has complete knowledge of God. Shlomo's own Einakul would destroy what he built, and Shlomo himself would prophesize it. Shlomo came back as Yirmiyahu. Shlomo's own Einakul destroyed what he built, and Shlomo was there to witness it, not just to witness it, but to foretell it for decades. So says the Chidah, that's why Nebuchadnezzar survived the war of Sancheriv. He has Shlomo's blood in his veins. Says the Rameh Mipano, That's why Nevuchadnezzar doesn't even know why, but he loves Yirmiyahu. This is his Seder. Look at number 18. This is the Chidah in another Sefer where he says, the reason why they were so close is for this reason. And he says the same thing. Shloim HaMelech converted the Queen of Sheba. They had a daughter. From the zera of the daughter came Nebuchadnezzar. You see clearly from the Chidah in both places, he wasn't just a grandchild. Shloim and Queen of Sheba had a daughter. From there, years later, came Nebuchadnezzar. But that's why he loved many generations. But that's why he loved Yirmiyahu, even though he didn't know. His mazel saw. So that's an incredible thing from the Kabbalists. Oh, that's why when Yirmiyahu told God in the beginning of Sefer Yirmiyahu, I don't want to go. Hashem says, I knew you before you were born. You know what he meant? I know you from centuries ago. You're Shloimeh. You're the guy that built this. Therefore, you have to be the one, only you can be the one to prophesy its destruction. This is your fate. This is your destiny. This is your destiny. And he says, Yedaticha, I knew you. Rashi writes in Chumash, Yediyah means to love somebody, to know someone in an affectionate way. Because it says about Shloimeh when he was born, Hashem Aheva, God loved him. God loved him. He was called Yedidya, the friend of God. Before you were born, I knew you. This is your fate. This is your destiny. So it's incredible.
It's more heartbreaking. He's the guy who had to describe what he built. He knew how beautiful it was. He worked so hard to make it so beautiful. And now it's...
His own Einikul has to destroy it, and he has to witness, he has to foretell it, but he was given the chance to salvage it.
Yeah.
He gave his best. Yeah. He gave his best. Yeah. But you look through the story, this is Yirmiyahu's life. He was there from the beginning of the end of the end, When everything starts to crumble, he was there. He tries his best. His friends were murdered, his fellow prophets. He spent many years in jail, from one prison cell to another. He was beaten up numerous times. He died in that mud, in that quicksand. He's in prison, another prison cell for his own safety. He does his best. The Jews, they scoff at him his entire life. He's called Buzzy. They laughed at him. You're Baba. He was suspect of being with other people's wives. He said, God, don't do this to me. Hashem said, this is not up to you. This is your fate. And the Eibishter sucked him into it. He says, no, you're just a Navi for the Goyim. And then he accepted. Once he was in, you'll speak about the Goyim one day, but for now you first speak about the Jews. And he gave that mashal. It's like the Kohen that was called up to serve in the Beis Hamikdash. There's a Soita here, okay. But one detail is missing, that the Soita is your mother. And then you have these stories at the end that originally he wants to follow the Jews to Bavel, and he goes with them in the chains. And they're crying, and he's crying, and ultimately he says, in Israel they need me more. And that Medrash in number 9, where the Jews were crying, exactly. He said, now you're crying. If you would have cried one tear in Yerushalayim, none of this would have happened. It's incredible.
The most hated person to the most beloved.
Well, after he left, they probably weren't so happy with him. And then the Jews schlepped him down to Egypt, where he meets Plato. That's interesting. And then, according to the Medrash Agad in number 19, they kill him. The Jews kill him. Even according to the Barbanel, it's not much better. When Nevuchadnezzar came and killed those Jews in Egypt, conquered Egypt, he schleps Yirmiyahu to Bavel. We don't know that Yirmiyahu ever had a wife. We have these records about his children are really, each one is tzarachiyun. This daughter that we had, the only record is this story, his daughter in the bathtub and Ben Sira. And even the Yerushalmi, the Radak, says that Yechezkel was his son. The Gemara in Megillah says Rachav had so many impressive grandchildren who were prophets. And it mentions Yirmiyahu. It mentions 8 people. There's no mention of Yechezkel there. He would make it 9. There's no mention there. So it seems like this Yerushalmi, the Radak says, is Lav Davka unanimously accepted. So we don't know if he had kids exactly. And he had just a very sad life. It's a very sad life of Yirmiyahu. What?
He was carrying a yoke over him, no?
That was one of the prophecies
Very
he had.
symbolic.
Yeah, well, and Bechlal and Navi had to do an action, a symbolic action. It brought the prophecy into the physical world.
Was it unique to Yirmiyahu?
No, Yechezkel also did. No. Other prophets, the false prophets did. Anyhow, but on the other hand, listen. Amir Tashem Yirmiyahu is going to come back, and he'll witness the building of the third Beis Hamikdash, and hopefully he'll have a smile on his face. We'll be able to smile together with him. All right.